Mr. Fielding, Commissioner Fielding.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. In respect, first of all, I would like to thank, and I know all of the Commission would like to thank you all for this presentation. It's been very helpful, it's been very lively, and it's been insightful, and we appreciate that. And I also would be remiss if I didn't make comment about how impressed we are with the work of the state of New Jersey, which certainly seems to be at the front end of meeting this challenge. In respect to the hour, I will just have one question. Our task at the end of the day is that we have to make recommendations. So if you sense some frustration on our part, it's because we're in areas where we're on uncharted water, and we're trying to figure out what recommendations we should make. I mean, our basic task is understand what happened on 9/11, what might have been done to protect it and prevent it, and what recommendations we have to make to ensure, as best one can, that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. In making recommendations, we obviously have to make them that are realistic and practical and workable. There are a lot of recommendations you could make, but they're not going to go anywhere. These have to be workable recommendations. And we're studying the federal government and how it reacted and how it was prepared for terrorist attacks. But as you've heard many times today, the private sector it controls 85% of the crucial infrastructure of the nation. So the national preparedness can't be separated from the preparedness in the private sector. It can't be. So I guess what I'd like you each to do is join our commission for a moment, and you have the opportunity to make one recommendation in this area. I'd be appreciative if each of you would try. Thank you.
Peter? One of the things I looked at before coming here, I think there's a Presidential Decisional Directive 63 that sets up a kind of model that there are interesting parallels between that model and New Jersey's statute that created the Domestic Security Preparedness Task Force, in that it matched governmental entities that had responsibility for certain industry sectors with those industries to work collectively on procedures, security procedures. Now, whether you follow that by using all the breadth of the existing agencies, or whether you take that model and house it in a particular agency like Homeland Security, I would leave to you. But I do think that in order for you to develop workable, intelligent, and intelligent standards that will be followed by the industry, I think you need a collection of governmental persons that have expertise in that area and industry representatives who have expertise in this area. And I don't mean industry figureheads. I mean the technical people who really know what their business is, who can sit down and help you work through these issues about security, what's workable, what's not workable. And I think, secondly, there ought to be some national body that promulgates these regulations and then helps private industry and government exercise to test a lot of these security procedures. You know, one of the things that has been most beneficial to us in New Jersey is that we conduct exercises. We conduct tabletop exercises, and we just this past weekend did a full-scale one out at the Port Authority that involved several municipalities, the Port Authority, federal agencies, and several state agencies, because we have to see if these things will work. Our goal is not to pat ourselves on the back and to prove how smart we are. Our goal is to find flaws in what our practices are so we can change them. We know that there's going to be another attack here. It's just a matter of when. We also know that that attack is going to occur to private industry, because that is how you hurt America. You cripple our economy and you frighten us. So we are always thinking the private sector. Nobody's going to hit downtown Trenton, New Jersey, or Newark, New Jersey, or the City Hall in New York City. That's a worthless target. they're going to hit an office building or some kind of plant that disrupts that industry. So I would suggest that you follow the model that we have in New Jersey and that I think is reflected in Decisional Directive 63. And whether you do it by using multiple entities and agencies in the federal government, or whether you house it in a single agency, I think you need to do it, and I think you need to make that expertise available to states that really want to do this but don't have the resources to do it economically, don't have the structure to do it governmentally. And I think you have to make some of this available on the internet and by software, CD-ROM, so that you can essentially train people to farm rather than farming for them.
Mr. Susman?
Oh, great question. And I do have one answer. You're limiting us to one, right? Yes, one. I don't know how to
We'll
do
accept others later.
I don't know how to do this, but I want to think about it, and we should all think about it. But I think probably we would move the fastest and farthest towards security and preparedness if every business entity, government, institution, etc., would be required, here's where I step back, I'm not wearing anybody's hat, required to think about security and preparedness and write down your assessment of how your institution or business is doing. Okay? Now, I don't follow this up by saying some government agency, a Homeland Security czar ought to swoop down and read it and tell you where you're going wrong. I don't know the answer there. I think employees, shareholders, insurers would all be very interested in what you had to say. And I do see with large and small businesses that many of them are doing a great job of assessment and planning, but many, many are not. And so just maybe thinking about security would lead to a great deal of action in boards of directors and among senior managers who have left this to their security and risk staff so far.
Thank you. Mr. Harvey?
I think the building manager and owners would just like to see one governing body that takes the lead in developing, mandating, and enforcing the code, and not have, like we have in New York City, the fire department superseding the building department and the building department superseding the National Electrical Code and the electrical code superseding somebody else. We would like to see one governing body that we have some input with, and not to berate anybody here, but not with the CEOs, with the technical people, the meat and potato people, or the people in the trenches, for lack of better words. I think that would all do us justice as an owner or a manager of a building.
Mr. Fielding, I'm going to give you one answer with two parts. I think that
That surprises me.
the two things that I think would be most effective. First, I think that you should recommend, and I would have the Department of Homeland Security take the lead here with deference to industry groups as appropriate, but ultimate responsibility rests with the Department of Homeland Security to set standards by a date certain in the top, you can truncate as however you like, the top 10 sectors. I mean, we can go down the list: chemicals, transportation, telecom, etc. It's not hard to make the list. By a date certain. And if the Department of Homeland Security wants to defer to one of the ISACs or an industry group to set the standard, fine. But by X, there has to be a standard. Part B is, and this goes beyond what might be immediately feasible, but I think that in areas in which a terrorist attack would involve the loss of thousands of lives or the substantial interruption of millions of lives, that mandating anti-terrorism insurance would provide the kind of market-based pricing incentive that would be effective. And I think, my own personal opinion is, it has to be mandated to avoid the problems that otherwise occur in insurance markets with selection effects and the greatest risks not taking up the insurance. So,
Mr. Moderator, you want to join us too?
I would love to. Briefly, I'd say if you could do one single focus. It would be to spotlight a particular, albeit high-level standard, process-based standard. NFPA 1600 was started in 1992. It's had diversity, dozens and dozens of organizations. It's built upon the experience of decades of FEMA's involvement. It's yet nonetheless been signed off by private sector entities. It is clearly not the detailed level of, with the specificity that one would like to have down the road with one for chemical, one for transportation, et cetera. But it is a functional-based standard that I think, on the whole, could be a very effective voluntary standard, paralleling, I believe it was Mr. Gorton earlier today, when he focused on ISO, parallel the ISO experience where, in fact, entities would look to embrace this as part of their, if you will, twofold, their marketing perspective, that they are in fact a NFPA 1600 compliant organization. And secondly, once that's in place, it would allow the insurance companies themselves to give that price and underwriting perspective that they discussed. It would also allow market-driven approaches, just as we heard from the Rockefeller Center experience. If an entity was in fact compliant with NFPA 1600, there would be the possibility that whether it be a tenant situation or whether it be an individual that might even be employee, they could decide whether or not they wanted to work for or do business with a particular entity if it had this accreditation. So I think that's doable. The standard is out there. It's existent. It's already reflective of almost over 10 years of evolution, and I think that's doable in the short run.
Thank you all very much.
It's been a long day, but I think all of us have learned quite a bit from it, and actually, as the day has evolved, each panel has built on the one before in a very interesting way, at least for this commissioner. And because Bill has asked the questions, which is normally our role, I'm going to make a statement or summary, which is normally your role. First of all, I learned a lot from the written materials. I think Peter Orszag's piece is very interesting, and I commend it to everyone, and the roundtable piece that Tom Susman did is terrific. And substantively, you all have provided us with lots of grist for the mill. Here, but what is interesting to me is at the end of this day, there is, in fact, something emerging like a consensus. And here's what I'm hearing. First of all, we have to have a standard setting process, and it has to involve tremendous amount of industry input and ownership if you can get it. Sometimes you can't always get it. It's true, Peter Harvey, that the ISAC process established in PDD 63 looks great. Not happening, in my personal view. Could, but they are not standing up and saying, we're going to set standards for our industry. They're just not where they need to be, and therefore, government's role is in establishing a timetable and a sense of urgency with the ultimate notion that if the private sector can't come together or won't come together, there will be a standard set for it, which is a pretty good incentive from my perspective in counseling industry. So that's number one. Number two, if you do have standards, it seems to me all of you are saying they have to be performance-based, that command and control, micromanaging by government doesn't work. And a corollary of that is agility. I think one of you, it may have been Peter, made the observation that you can't just solve for the last attack and the last challenge. And therefore, we have to figure out a way to be agile in a way that we haven't been before. Agility and government regulation are not two concepts that you generally hear in the same breath. At the same time, they need to be cohesive so that, James, so that the private sector is not responding to 6 different inconsistent requirements. And then we talked about incentives, the carrot that flows from lower insurance premiums, for example, or the stick that comes from legal liability if you don't do what is reasonable, what the industry has set as the standard. And I liked very much Tom Sussman's point about the other stakeholders, that just giving transparency to what a company is doing or not will unleash all kinds of pressures that are really not there right now because there is not that transparency. So the board members, the shareholders, the community members, I think, would be good pressure on industry to step up to the plate. And then one thing I would add of my own, which we haven't really heard today, but which I think is true, is that if you have a standard and it becomes the way in which an industry addresses a particular problem, then the one company that would otherwise be the leader and be perhaps out there all by itself doesn't bear the cost that puts it at a competitive disadvantage. And that's where this sort of regulation, if you will, is pro-business. Because right now, if you expend the money to make yourself hardened against attack and to do the right thing for your employees, you are incurring a layer of costs which your competitors may not be. And that's something that business understands and appreciates and is fearful of. So that, I say as your pupil this afternoon, is what I have taken from your lessons, and I want to say I think it's been an enormously valuable experience. Thank you very much.